Welcome back to the garden. It's mid-June and strawberry season is in full swing. We have a lot of fruit coming in right now. It actually started fruiting. We started picking about 2 weeks ago, and you can see right here we've got this lovely fruit. I think, you know, we're probably nearing the end of the peak. Things are about to be on the downswing, so maybe a week and a half more of fruiting. This variety is called Chandler, and I've got 4 beds of them, and 2 of them I will be ripping after they're done fruiting. So they're the older ones, and I keep them for 2 years, and after 2 years I rip them out, and then I use those 2 beds to plant a pumpkin crop into pumpkins that are short days to maturity, 90 days or so that I can still get another crop yet this season. And I keep them for only 2 years because disease builds up in the soil, and I want to limit that. And so I rotate them around the garden. I'll be planting another variety, another succession in August, and that's going to go in the bed right behind me. Here we are in the Sugar Snap peas, and they are loaded. It is a lovely Sugar Snap year so far, and I have not yet harvested these, and I think they're gonna get ahead of me. But I just wanna show you what I'm looking for when I'm harvesting the sweetest Sugar Snap peas. This is a variety called Sweet Gem, and I planted it on April 4th. It's now mid-June, and they are, you know, they'll be done by early July. But when I harvest these, I'm looking for ones that are more or less plump. I've said things like fat like my finger in the past to help people learn how to harvest them, because if you harvest them too skinny, like this one right here, they end up being, or the ones up top, I'll pluck this off and put it next to here. This one's ripe right here, and this one is not. We have unripe and ripe, and this one's just going to be bland, kind of vegetal tasting, and this one's going to be nice and sweet. So I'm going to go for all the ones that are plump like that. So here we go. Last thing I want to say about peas is we don't have any here yet like this, but you can tell that they are too ripe or over mature when you start to see them, the individual peas inside, like almost ribbed, like really swollen. So if you see a pod, and you know this middle one's kind of like it, where it's swollen, but if every single one is like, you know, bumps on a log, then those peas inside are usually tough, and when you bite into it, they'll be you know, getting hard and mature, because those are the seeds. And the other thing we can see on this pod is that this end is flat and there are no peas inside there. That is because of poor pollination on this pea. It's not a widespread issue on these plants. Something just went wrong with this one. But that's usually a sign, you know, if anything can go wrong at that time. It could be not enough insect pollination. It could be that there wasn't enough water. But again, not a widespread issue. But if you're seeing a lot of that on your peas, then it's, you know that, you know, insects and copious water are beneficial at the time of flowering and pollination. So we're in the carrots now, and if you've watched a previous video, you may remember us planting these on April 10th, and they are probably ready to go, some of these. So we're doing a check-in on them. We're eager to eat them and stop buying carrots at the store. So let's see if we've got them ready. I'm just using a digging fork right here. I'm gonna just dig a little bit away from the bed, or from the row, I should say. If you get too close, you end up spearing the carrots and causing damage. So I'm gonna fork in there, pry back. We got about a ½ inch rain a couple days ago, so the soil's pretty wet. But I'm getting some nice looking baby carrots here. And I just think harvesting root crops it's almost like Christmas morning every time you pull out these things and you're like, oh my gosh, wow. Harvesting potatoes with kids is a lot of fun, and they really like coming out here. My kiddos do. If we leave the fork out here, and then sometimes when they're playing in the yard, they'll just come and dig their own snack and hose them off and just eat them right out of the field. So yeah, this is what they're looking like. A little small yet, but definitely edible. Here we are in the beets, and we planted these on the same date as our carrots, April 10th, mid-June now, and they are starting to be ready as well. These mature a little faster than the carrots. So in here I can see that we've got some bigger sized beets. Not big beets by any means, but definitely ones that we want to take into the kitchen and start eating. And I like to take out ones that are about this size also, because as I take those out, it'll make more space for the smaller ones in here to fill out and be big later. So I'm just going to harvest a small bunch here. So I'm seeing some disease in these beets. And on the leaves here, you can see these small circles. They're looking a little reddish, red circle surrounding a pale dead area. And this is more advanced. This is just starting. This is a disease that's pretty common in beets and chard. It's called Cercospora or Cercospora. I call it Cercospora. Some people call it the other. Anyway, it's difficult to control. Easiest to control by buying a Cercospora resistant variety, which there are more of for chard than there are for beets, because you eat the leaves and that's the part that you want to keep clean. On the beets, they generally still make beets even though they have it. You don't get the good, nice looking beet greens, but they can marshal through, and if you get a nice dry spell in the year, then they will, even if the old leaves have died, they can shoot out new leaves to replace the old ones. I wanted to show you interplanting that I'm doing here. I've got young basil transplants here that are planted in the same space that I had my early lettuce succession. And so first lettuce planting is all harvested. Next lettuce is just about ready to harvest. I did come out and harvest, you can see maybe some remains from lettuce that I picked this morning. I had this basil already planted in here. And the basil, it's just about time, you know, it's getting warm. We did have some 40s overnight last night. And so coming into these warm nights, warm days, the basil is going to thrive, the lettuce will not. So I think it's a nice way to mix in these two crops that like different things and to make the most of this space. Here we are at our buckwheat cover crop. We planted it about a month ago to cover this space that we're going to be planting with crops in early July, mid-July. I like to get it cut down so that we can start this ground, the weed control on this ground a little early. So I'm going to weed whack this down and cover that with the black ground cover, and that will smother the buckwheat and also kill any weeds. I'm a little sad about cutting this buckwheat this early because it's starting to flower but not quite there yet, but I'm glad that we have another section of it that will be able to feed the pollinators for the next several weeks before we have to cut that one down. Buckwheat is super tender, so you see a weed whacker just slices right through it. And that same tenderness will cause it to, underneath the fabric, just break down super quickly. So we'll be able to plant into here in just a couple weeks. So we're in our cucumbers now, and I like to trellis these cucumbers. Because I have this garden pretty packed in, if I don't trellis them, they end up crawling into some other crop. So I use a cattle panel, which I'll be bringing in shortly, just set up on this T-post, which I pounded in here. And I just will lay the cattle panel next to the T-post, next to the cucumbers, and use zip ties to keep it on there. Just a couple are necessary, and they're super fast, just like that, and that. And I've got the cattle panel in place for the cucumbers. All done. The one thing that's different about this cattle panel is it's half of the length of a cattle panel that you buy at the store. I bought long ones. I had to borrow a friend's trailer and get them here, but then I used an angle grinder to just cut each of these horizontal pieces. So I have two pieces now from one cattle panel, and they're much easier to carry around the yard at this size. You could even cut them smaller if you wanted, but they're durable, they're easy to pull plant residue off of in the fall when the plant is done. I really enjoy using these as trellis. Cucumbers are natural climbers. They will grab on, but to get them started, I like to give them a little helping hand. And for these ones, I'm going to try to weave them through a little bit so that the new growth will then be able to get on rather than wanting to crawl like they have been. Here in the tomatoes, I am trellising tomatoes with T-posts and twine, which I'll show you in a sec, but I've got one T-post left here to pound before I've completed the framework for my trellis. And I go with the tallest T-posts I can find. I think at the time I was buying these 7.5 feet was what was available, but I need to pound them in a fair bit so that they don't just fall out when the ground gets wet, either when it rains a lot or when I irrigate. So they're not 7.5 feet out of the ground at this point, but I want to make them as tall as possible because the tomatoes climb and I don't want them to get too tall or that I can't trellis them anymore. So here's our post. I've got to use the post pounder and I want to get that on before I stand it up straight, otherwise I can't get it on there. I also need to wear this to protect my hearing. And I put this end one in at an angle, maybe 30 degrees. That helps it, when all the weight of the tomatoes are on it, it helps it not just cave in. It helps it stand and keep the line taut. So here we go. So here, back in the tomatoes, I'm continuing the trellising process, and we've got the twine that I want to tie to the T-post. Any old knot's going to do here. Double overhand, granny knot. And I'm just going to walk this down and around. Like that. And then I'm going to wrap it around the T-post like that. And I'm just going to run a line on either side of these tomatoes. This is the perfect time. If I wait and they flop over, it's much harder to get them to stand up. So I want to just run a line on either side to support them. And I just repeat this down the whole line and then back up the other side. And we've got my tomatoes trellised. And I continue to do this about every foot or so up the T-post as the year goes and until I get to the top. So we've got our trellis line in place, and now I'm going to pinch off the lower leaves and lower shoots that are below that. And just snapping them off like this. These lower leaves are more likely to get sick from soil splash, and also these lower shoots are all going to be new leaders, and I don't want them to sprawl out underneath my line. So I've pinched them off so that everything is contained here and tidy and trellised up. Each month we've been looking at the garlic and tracking its progress. It is looking so good right now, and it is garlic scape season right here. So we are going to snap off the garlic scapes. A scape is a flower stalk. This little bud here would open and flower if we let it, but we want it to send all of its energy down to the bulb in the ground and develop that rather than do sexual reproduction through its flowers. So in June, every year with hardneck garlic, we snap off the scapes, and these are edible just like garlic bulbs or cloves, and you can just dice this up. It's nice and tender. We like to make garlic scape pesto with it. So here we go. I like the little pigtail shape of it. If you get it early enough, like I'm getting it right now, they just snap off. It's not too late if you can't snap them. You just need a pair of clippers to get them pruned off once they get woody and they're not as tender to cook with. But at this stage, got a nice harvest of garlic scapes right here. It's mid-June. It is time to be planting melons. We are going to plant our last succession, second and last succession this week. But last month, you may remember, we planted our first succession, and here we are. We're going to take a look at it underneath this cover. Oh, it's looking so good. We've got our muskmelons, cantaloupe here, and our watermelon right here, looking disease and pest free at this point. I am so pleased with the progress of these.